This is the world's smallest VR headset, the Bigscreen Beyond 2, just 107 grams. That's actually lighter than the banana in the thumbnail. I purchased it myself because I wanted this review to be completely unbiased. I placed my order in March and it just arrived at the end of August. Question is, did we wait for a tiny miracle or a micro disaster? We'll look at the hardware, visuals, comfort, and what it's actually like to live with. So let's do this. Starting off with the hardware, obviously this thing is tiny, and I knew that, but actually holding it for the very first time and every other time since then just feels unreal. Just for context, I've got the Pimax Crystal Super here, a Quest 3, even a PSVR 2. And putting the Bigscreen Beyond 2 next to them feels like someone slipped a toy into the lineup. And at just 107 grams, it feels impossible, like your brain refuses to believe it's a real piece of VR hardware. But the build quality is what really surprised me. This thing doesn't feel cheap or fragile. It's a beautifully crafted piece of tech with a kind of precision that I've never seen on anything else. Now, because it's this small, the cable could have ruined the entire form factor, but Bigscreen did something smart here. Instead of a thick, stiff wire that yanks the headset down, they went with a fiber optic cable. It's super thin, super flexible, that basically disappears when you're wearing it. And the little clip on the back of the strap, simple but genius. Keeps the cable tucked away so it doesn't drag. The link box also deserves a mention. Unlike other PCVR setups, this doesn't need its own power brick. It's just two USBs and a display port and you're good to go. That's a small thing, no pun intended, but in the PCVR world, fewer cables mean fewer headaches. Not everything is perfect though. The IPD adjustment is clunky. You have to pop off the face interface and manually adjust each side, with the number readouts being kind of small and pretty hard to see. It works, but it's nowhere near as smooth as something like the Quest 3's dial system. And here's where I want to pause for a second, because the size, the weight, and the custom face fit all scream comfort miracle. But let me tease this now. Just because it's light and custom made for your face doesn't mean it's instantly comfortable, and I'll explain in a minute. Moving on to visuals, let's start with the lenses. They are tiny, so small that it feels impossible they could deliver a usable image, let alone a decent field of view. And yet, I got 102 degrees vertical and 108 degrees horizontal using Test HMD. It's nothing groundbreaking, but for something this small, the FOV is shockingly solid. But here's where I hit my first unpleasant surprise: binocular overlap. I'm not usually too sensitive to this on headsets, but here I do clearly notice it, especially when looking at close-up objects. It gave me some eye strain, which makes me think the focal distance is actually higher than most, and that's not a good thing. Now, according to WimFov, my binocular overlap at 67mm IPD came up to just over 74%, which is not great. You could lower the IPD since the lenses are so forgiving and get more, but at the expense of field of view. On the positive side, edge-to-edge clarity is excellent. I put it at about 95% of the lens being sharp. You can actually glance around with your eyes instead of moving your whole head, which is a big win for comfort and immersion. But then comes the glare. It's not constant and it's not the worst I've ever seen, but it's there. Bright menus, white text on black backgrounds, sunlight in a scene, you'll notice it. For me, it shows up mostly on the lower half of the lenses. Now, people say it's way better than the original Beyond, but I never tried that one, so all I can say is it's noticeable, but not a deal breaker, at least for me. And finally, the OLED panels. You get the deep blacks and contrast you'd expect, but the colors, honestly, underwhelming. I even posted on Reddit about this when I first got it, and I said the colors weren't as punchy as I expected, and weeks later, I still feel the same. They're not bad, but when you hear OLED, you think crazy vivid colors, and that's not really the case here, at least not with the brightness settings I've had to use, which I'll explain in a second. So, the optics are a bit of a mixed bag. Sharpness and clarity are fantastic, but glare, overlap, and muted colors kind of pull it back a bit. And that's why raw specs only really tell half of the story. The real question is, how do these visuals feel in actual use? That's where things got interesting. So let's talk about comfort, because the custom-built facial interface is both the blessing and the curse. When you order, you scan your face with an iPhone, Bigscreen makes a special facial interface just for you, and in theory, it should fit like a glove, and at first mine did fit, but not quite perfectly. The cushion tilted the headset just slightly downwards, which did three things. It put pressure on my nose, my eyelashes were barely brushing the lenses, which smudged them constantly, and it made aligning the headset a little finicky. Now, because this thing is so light, none of that was unbearable, but it wasn't the comfort miracle I was expecting. Here's the good news. I reached out to Bigscreen support, explained the problem, and a week later, DHL was at my door with a replacement cushion. Now, in the meantime, I didn't just sit around waiting. So pro tip, tiny magnets. I bought a pack of 3mm by 1mm round magnets on Amazon, added one to each of the top slots and stacked two in the bottom slots, and it made a huge difference. Cheap, easy, and effective. So if you're in the same boat, I'll leave a link in the description to similar ones to the ones I got. Now, straps. The default cloth strap is actually very comfortable and especially great for lying down, but it does tend to slip a lot. They do include an optional top strap to help with that, and it does, but I still found myself readjusting this more than what I'd like. That's why I ordered the audio strap. Comfort-wise, it's excellent. The only annoyance is that the built-in headphones can snag your ears while you're putting it on, but just fold them up first and you're good. Once it's on, it feels great and you don't have to ruin the sleek form factor by wearing external headphones or dangling IEMs. So comfort for me ended up being a story of expectations versus reality. The lightness and the custom scan set me up for a miracle, though in practice I had to tweak it to get there. But despite all that, performance and actually using the headset daily matters a lot, so let's talk about that. Specs on paper are one thing, but the real test is how does it actually feel when you use it? And let's start with a big one, refresh rate. At full 2560 by 2560 resolution per eye, the Beyond 2 runs at 75 Hz. You can bump that up to 90 Hz, but that drops the render resolution to 1920 by 1920 per eye and then upscales it back. So you gain speed, but you lose sharpness, and it is very noticeable. I thought 75 Hz would be a deal breaker because on any of my LCD headsets, I could never bear 72 Hz mode. But here's the surprise, it feels way smoother than I expected. In fact, motion looks closer to 90 Hz on LCD headsets, so this is one area where the OLED panels are working their magic. It's not perfect, but way better than my fear going in. On a 5090, I could super sample to 200% in Automobilista 2 and hold 75 Hz with a full grid. The difference in clarity was dramatic, especially in sims and slower paced titles where you can savor the details. Not every game cooperated though. iRacing, for example, started creaking when I went past 100% resolution with everything maxed out in the game. And that brings me to the focal distance and binocular overlap issues. In iRacing's Formula cars, the center halo pole made it really difficult to focus on the road. With the Beyond 2 optics, that made me feel almost cross-eyed, and it was distracting enough that I wouldn't want to race long sessions like that. It is niche and wasn't an issue with any other cars, but it shows how focal distance can matter depending on what you play. Persistence blur is another issue. Like most OLED panels, when you whip your head from side to side, the image smears. At 100% brightness, it's pretty bad, enough to break immersion. But lowering brightness to 75% fixes most of it while still keeping the headset plenty bright. Bonus, this also reduces glare. Now let's break it down by use case. Fast-paced games like FPS or action games, excellent. The headset is so light that nothing wiggles or shifts on your face. Combined with flawless lighthouse tracking and index controllers, it's a blast. Sim racing and flight sims. This is where the Beyond 2 really shines. At high super sampling, cockpit details are razor sharp and the lightweight makes long sessions easier. The only downside is that halo pole issue in certain cars. Movies in big screen. Honestly, this might be the best headset for movies I've ever used. The deep blacks look fantastic in movies and the tiny form factor makes it feel less like you're strapping a brick to your face. Now, obviously the glare will still be there in movies, but with the brightness turned down a bit, it's not really as bad as I thought it might be. One other small negative though is the heat generation. Now, I keep my fans on 85% in the Bigscreen utility app and I can't hear or feel them. But after a few hours, the custom facial interface traps some warmth and sweat. It's not unbearable, but it is noticeable. Bigscreen's upcoming Halo strap is supposed to improve airflow, mine's on pre-order, so fingers crossed it ships on time. So in daily use, the Beyond 2 doesn't feel like a miracle across the board, but it does something that no other headset has for me. Once you're in, it almost disappears, and that's a big win. And it brings us to the big question: should you buy it? Well, not until you see one last issue that nearly made me return mine. So after weeks of testing, I was almost ready to call this my daily driver, but there was this one issue that kept happening, which nearly made me box it up and send it back. For me, surprisingly enough, it was the binocular overlap and focal distance. It hit me hardest in iRacing, but any game that puts UI or props too close can trigger the same strain. That's not something every headset does, and it's distracting enough that for a moment I thought maybe this isn't gonna work for me. Now, I did find ways to somewhat work around it by getting a new interface and lowering the IPD below my real one, but I still tend to avoid cars with a halo pole right in the middle of my field of view, and in most games it wasn't a deal breaker, but it's the kind of hidden issue you'd never know about unless you've actually lived with the headset, and that's why I'm glad I didn't stop here, because I worked past it and the Beyond 2 started to make sense in a way no other headset has. So, is the Bigscreen Beyond 2 a tiny miracle or a micro disaster? For me, it's neither, and both. Here's the truth: this headset doesn't crush the competition in clarity or colors or refresh rate. The glare is real, persistence blur exists, the focal distance quirks could throw some people off. But then there's the size, the weight, the fact that once you set it up right, it almost disappears on your face. That's the miracle. No other headset I've tried makes VR feel this physically effortless, and that alone has made it my daily driver for PC VR. Now, let me split this verdict two ways, depending on who you are. If you've been waiting on your pre-order for months, yes, there are quirks, but if comfort and immersion matter most to you, then I'd say it's worth holding out for. Canceling now would mean missing out on the one thing no other headset can match: how invisible this feels when you're inside VR. If you're just considering this now as a potential buyer, ask yourself what you care about the most. If you need absolute top-tier visuals or an extra high field of view, then you'll be happier elsewhere. But if you want a headset that prioritizes size, weight, and comfort above everything, then the Beyond 2 is in a league of its own. So no, it's not a miracle headset across the board. For me, this wasn't about the sharpest screens or about the widest FOV. The miracle is that I forget I'm even wearing a headset. Cheers, guys.